There we go. What I'm here to talk to you about is groundings. Of course, there's nothing new about grounding. Ships have been doing it for centuries. In fact, 306 years ago, almost, in November 1707, the rather exotically named British Admiral, Sir Cloudesley Shovel, managed to spectacularly run his ship, HMS Association, and 3 others of his fleet into the Isles of Scilly with the loss of 4 ships and 1,500 lives, including his own. Rumour has it that Sir Cloudesley himself was washed up alive but was beaten to death with a rock by a local Scilly woman who took a fancy to his ring, a rather splendid gold and emerald specimen. That disaster owed its cause to the difficulty that the navigators of the day had in determining longitude. Reliable chronometers had not been invented, and that, of course, led to a lifetime's work by Thomas Harrison. That's a separate story in itself. Of course, today, the determination of a ship's latitude and longitude is but a moment's work of glancing at the GPS unit in the wheelhouse, where both latitude and longitude are displayed to startling levels of accuracy. Yet, despite the advances in training, advances in technology on board ships, we are still getting ships running aground. So something is amiss, and what's going wrong, and why are we concerned about it? Well, the concern firstly arises from cost considerations. This is a rather difficult table to interpret at first glance, but what it shows is the development of claims on the international group pool in the first 6 months of the underwriting year, as of 20th August of each underwriting year, the top line, and then the development of those claims in 12-month intervals thereafter. And you can see from that what we know already, that 2006, 2007 had been the worst 2 years on record. Those claims, as the years have progressed, have stretched out to just under 500 million, approaching 500 million and 400 million respectively. If we track along to 2012, you can see there in the first 6 months of 2012, claims have been notified at around about double the previously highest level. And in 2013, things are not looking too good either. 96.7 million of claims notified in the first 6 months of this year. So that's the background to the concern. If we drill down to look at some of these claims and try and understand what is causing them, on the left-hand side of that chart there for the last 6 years, you can see the number of groundings in pure numbers, and then expressed as a percentage of the total by number and the percentage by value. And what is evident from that is that there is a consistent imbalance between the percentage by number and value. There's a significantly greater cost of these incidents. If we overlay onto that the incidents of collision and fixed and floating object damage, which generally involve some sort of navigational error and hence the same sort of issues that one comes across in groundings, then the result is rather more stark. If you look at the combined figures over on the right-hand side, then you can see that these incidents are the ones that are having the most significant impact on the international group pool and the excess loss reinsurance contract arrangements. So, what are the causes of these incidents? Well, set out there are some bullet points in no particular order, and if you scan through those, I'm sure many of those won't come as any particular surprise. Top there, we've got fatigue, and that's featured in a number of presentations that you've gone through this afternoon. What we find in these incidents is that it's generally not one particular matter that is making is the dominant cause. It's a bit like a buffet. There's a selection here. It's a mix and match, and you've got a number of factors that are combining to cause these incidents. So what I'm going to do now is just a bit of gratuitous scaremongering to demonstrate really excuse me, the issues that are out there and why we're concerned. I'm going to start by looking at this casualty that occurred in April 2010, the Shen Neng 1, a bulk carrier that was fully laden with coal that grounded on the Great Barrier Reef. The ship had loaded in Gladstone and was bound for China by Yuquan, and the passage plan for the outbound voyage involved the ship steaming north for about 50 miles from Gladstone to a waypoint that was southwest of the Douglas Shoal, and then she was to alter course to 075 degrees to pass in a channel between north of the Capricorn group of islands and south of the Douglas Shoal. Now, the ship sailed at 11 o'clock in the morning. The second mate took over the watch at midday, and as the ship progressed and his watch progressed, he thought there was an opportunity to save a bit of time and distance. If you look at the chart on the left-hand side of the screen there, he worked out that if he cut the corner, there was a bit of distance to be saved. It was about 2 nautical miles, so totally insignificant in the context of a trans-Pacific passage. But he got the agreement of the master to change the passage plan, and at 15:30 altered course to 020 to bring the ship to a new waypoint on the new track line. The new waypoint was fed into the was not fed into the GPS significantly. Now, the effect of that was that the warning system that was in place under the original passage plan, the GPS was set to sound an alarm when the ship was 2 miles from the waypoint. Now, he handed over the watch at 1600 to the chief officer, told him of the revised passage plan, told him that the coordinates were not of the new waypoint were not in the GPS, and handed over. Now, the chief officer was extremely tired. Although he was an experienced officer, it was his first trip on this ship, and he'd spent virtually the entire period of the loading in Gladstone on duty, and the result of that was that he had about 3 hours sleep in the last 38. When he came on watch, he looked at the chart and estimated that he'd arrive at the new alter course position at about 5 o'clock. He didn't measure the distance to go. He didn't compare that with the ship's speed over the ground to determine an accurate ETA, and no doubt his fatigue played a part in that. Now, if you look over to the chart on the right-hand side, you can see that if one projects the line of the new course that the ship is on across that course line that she's due to come on, she's heading directly for the Douglas Shoal. Now, the chief officer intended to fix the ship's position at 4:30. Just before that, the chief engineer came onto the bridge to ask what the ship's speed was so that he could compare it with the RPM. By the time he left, it was about 4:35, so the mate decided to delay fixing his position until 5 o'clock. In fact, the ship then passed the new waypoint at 4:42. By the time he got round to thinking about taking his new position at 5 o'clock, the ship was already starting to slow down, and she ran aground. She was hard aground on the reef. So, a number of things to think about arising from that. Moving on quickly, the Rena, a well-known casualty, ran aground on the Astrolabe Reef in October 2011, giving rise to what is the second largest ever wreck removal claim on the international group. There are similarities between this incident and the Shen Neng 1 in that there was a variation of the passage plan. The reason for that, the ship was on a passage from Napier in New Zealand, South Island, to Tauranga, and she was due to arrive at the pilot station here at about 0300 in the morning. The original passage plan had the vessel coming to a waypoint that was about 2 miles north of the Astrolabe Reef. About 2 hours before arrival, the second officer called the pilot station and told them of his ETA. They said that was going to be right at the end of the pilotage window, and that if he wanted to be sure of getting in, then he needed to get there as quickly as possible. So he started to look for ways of saving time and distance, and with the agreement of the master, changed the passage plan and fed in a new waypoint 1 mile north of the Astrolabe Reef, and started progressively altering the ship's heading to port. She was already, as you can see from the red etched hatched line there, already tracking south of the intended course line. That southerly displacement got worse as with the progressive course alterations to port. Shortly before 2 o'clock, the master came to the bridge. The ship's position had last been fixed at 0142. The system that operated on that ship was that the able seaman watchman took the ship's position by reading the coordinates off the GPS and plotted that position on the chart, and that position was then checked by the duty officer. Now, the seaman took the position at 0200, but didn't plot it, because when he came into the wheelhouse, into the chart room, the master and the second officer were discussing the vessel's arrival, so he didn't put the position on the chart. There was then some discussion. The second mate and the master felt that the ship was on a track that was north of the island. At that point, the most crucial error was made, which was to program into the GPS the final waypoint, the one at the pilot station, the one you can see right over on the extreme left-hand side of the screen. The effect of that was to then put the ship on a programmed track which took her right over the top of the astrolabe reef. Now, about 10 or 15 minutes before she grounded, an intermittent echo was detected. They didn't fix the ship's position really until it was too late, almost moments before she grounded, and we all know what the effect of that has been. It's led to an extremely time-consuming and costly wreck removal operation. There have been other incidents, happily ones that have not resulted in such catastrophic consequences, but that's simply more a matter of luck than judgment. Here we see a small container ship, the K-Wave, aground near Malaga in February 2011. Why? It was the third officer's birthday. The ship had left Algeciras bound for Valencia. She was on a broadly easterly course. At midnight, the third officer was relieved, and there then followed a gathering of other officers on the bridge, and from the recordings on the VDR, more than a few drinks were had. The party broke up on the instructions of the second mate at about 2 in the morning, and then, as you can see from this track, at 0215, there was a totally unexplained course alteration of 135 degrees to port. The next anybody knew about the matter was at 0546. The vessel is aground on a shelving beach. The chief officer came to the bridge to find it deserted, the engine running full ahead, and the ship hard aground. Similar tale arises here. Another small container ship, the Karen Shapers. She was on passage from Cork to Rotterdam, crossed the Irish Sea and was heading for the traffic separation scheme off Land's End, due to enter that at a waypoint at its northerly end to turn onto a southerly course. The master kept the 8 to 12 watch. He handed over at midnight to the second mate. The master was Ukrainian, the second mate was Filipino. The master then left the bridge, but at intervals returned, and on each occasion was sounding increasingly more intoxicated. There then was the sound of the second officer crying and instructing the master not to hit him anymore, at which point the master ordered the second mate off the bridge, and bizarrely he complied. He left the bridge despite having told the master he was drunk. The master then settled down in the chair in the wheelhouse and promptly fell asleep. You can hear the snoring on the VDR. And the next we know, the ship runs into Cornwall. And she had a number of near misses on the way. She was very close to another ship that was going into the southbound lane, and she passed just ahead of a ship that was coming up the northbound lane. To those of you who may know the coast of Cornwall, it's quite rocky and not the easiest coast in the world. The local fishermen there, when they saw the ship, said the master actually couldn't have done a better job of getting the ship onto the beach and avoiding the rocks if he'd been awake and sober. It was quite miraculous that there wasn't a disaster. And there have been any number of casualties that have occurred that indicate a certain lack of consciousness on the bridge. Here we see the Alva Star, which impaled Zakynthos in November 2006. Rather similarly, the Cafardida aground on Syros in November 2011. And in case you're thinking that it's only Greek islands that have a certain magnetic attraction to ships, here is the coastal isle, which ran aground on the Isle of Bute in July 2012. Again, investigation of that showed there was nobody on the bridge at all. Nobody on the bridge. The chief officer's explanation was that he'd had an attack of stomach cramps. He'd gone down below to use the toilet and had fallen unconscious for an hour and 45 minutes. A story that was given little credence by the MAIB inspectors when they went on board. There was also an issue on that case of fraudulent certificates of competence. So beware. And it goes on, this ship here, the Beaumont, aground in December 2012. Again, fatigue was a factor. The chief officer, in a nice, warm and darkened wheelhouse, fell asleep. And there we have it. So, best practice to avoid grounding. I could go on. There are countless incidents. Proper passage planning goes without saying. Vigilant watch-keeping. I think these bullet points really speak for themselves. But what I would stress, what I would like to emphasize, is the importance that superintendents have in making sure that ships are navigated safely. The only way you're going to do that effectively is to go on board, do a full navigational audit, undertake passages with your crews to make sure that they're following company procedures and navigating the ships properly. I mentioned also there mentoring, because an issue we see now is that there is less experience among the crews on ships, and you don't have the experience-based learning that we had, certainly in the days when I was at sea. Now the collective experience of the bridge teams on vessels is much lower than it ever was. There is really no substitute for experience-based learning, but mentoring is probably the next best alternative, and that's something I think should be encouraged. All of these considerations were what led to my club's latest loss prevention initiative, which, as Apostolos has already mentioned, is the DVD on groundings. Copies of it are in your delegate bags. Our objective behind this is to get this on as many ships as possible. The intended audience is masters and watchkeeping officers, really to raise awareness of the issues and the problems that have caused casualties in the past and help them to improve their future conduct and practice. It's also got within it 34 formal casualty investigation reports of groundings around the world. So there's a lot of material there for further study, and that people can learn the benefit of others' mistakes. If any of you need further copies of that, we'll be very happy to supply it free of charge. Any request either to our local office in Piraeus or to me in London. Thank you for your attention.